Dawn rose thin and colorless, the kind of pale morning that felt more like the world exhaling than waking. The sky above the plains wore a washed-out gray, stretched wide and tired, as though some great sorrow had scraped the color from it during the night. Winds drifted low, carrying the scent of dust and cold creosote, brushing over the land the way a grieving hand brushes over old letters. Elias Crowford rode through that hush like a man passing through an old photograph, silhouetted, solitary, part shadow, part memory. His horse's hooves gave soft, rhythmic thuds, steady as a heartbeat the world had nearly forgotten. His coat, long and earth-brown, fluttered behind him in slow, reluctant waves, collecting dust the way he collected stories he never told. He had been riding since before the sun pressed over the horizon. Couldn't sleep. Old ghosts tugged at him, whispering through the cold. He didn't fear them anymore. He'd learned long ago that grief becomes a kind of companion. A patient one. Up ahead, a dying ribbon of smoke drifted upward, thin, fragile, ashamed to be seen. Elias slowed his horse. Out here, smoke meant someone was trying to hold on to warmth they didn't rightly have. As he approached, he saw them, at first as shapes, then as souls. A woman, bent slightly at the waist, her hair tangled from wind and nights without shelter. 5 children were tucked around her, little bodies drawn into themselves like they were trying to disappear into her shadow. Their clothes sagged in weary folds, their faces were pale as ash. The woman raised her head when Elias stopped his horse a few yards away. Her eyes, good Lord, her eyes looked like wells after a long drought, cracked at the edges, emptied of everything but stubbornness. She clutched her youngest child against her ribs, the boy too weak even to whimper. Elias dismounted slowly, careful not to startle them. He kept his hands where she could see them, palms open, fingers loose. He'd seen this kind of hunger before. Up close. Too close. The woman tried to stand straighter when she spoke, though her voice trembled like a match in wind. "Sir, we haven't eaten in days." The words fell from her lips like something she'd been forced to swallow too many times, heavy with shame, soft with fatigue. Elias felt the wind pause around them, as if the land itself bowed its head. He didn't step forward. Didn't pity her. Pity could wound deeper than hunger. Instead, he knelt where he was, lowering his height so she didn't have to look up at anyone. The children watched him with hollow, suspicious eyes, especially the oldest boy, who straightened his thin shoulders as if trying to shield his family with nothing but his bones. "What's your name?" Elias asked quietly. The woman hesitated, as though names were a luxury she no longer believed she had a right to offer. "Mara," she said finally. "Mara Ellsworth." Her lips tightened, bracing for judgment, like she had met men before who heard a widow's name and saw only burden. Elias reached into his saddlebag without rising. He set a wrapped bundle of biscuits and jerky on the ground between them, not in her hands, not forced, just offered. Mara's jaw tensed. Her pride flickered like a dying ember. Hunger waged war with dignity in her eyes. So Elias looked away. He stood and pretended to adjust the leather straps along his horse's flank, giving her the space to choose without feeling watched. The children stared at the food like they were afraid it might vanish if they reached too quickly. Only when Elias heard the tiniest rustle, the crackle of paper, the gasp of relief, did he glance over his shoulder. Mara had taken the biscuits, but she broke them first for her children. The oldest boy refused at first, shaking his head like accepting kindness might cost something he couldn't repay. But when Mara pressed it gently into his hand, he ate like someone remembering what food tasted like. Elias swallowed hard. "Town's a few miles east," he said, keeping his voice low, calm. "You ought to rest proper. I can take you there." Mara's shoulders curled inward. "Town," she whispered, and even that single word carried hurt. They don't take kindly to folks like us." Elias didn't argue, not about her fear. Instead, he nodded once and extended a quiet offer. "I'll ride with you. That's all." 2 of the children climbed onto his horse, the smallest one clinging to the mane with trembling fingers. Mara walked beside the mare with the others, head bowed against the wind. They reached the settlement just as the sun climbed its first brave inch above the land. Sheriff Braddock was waiting. A thick man with a thicker sense of authority, his gaze swept over Mara's family like they were weeds daring to grow through his porch boards. "Crowford," he grunted. "What's this you got with you?" "A family," Elias said simply. Braddock snorted. "Strays more like. Best move 'em along before they sink roots. Folks here ain't running a charity." Mara flinched. The children clustered tighter. Shame rolled off them like heat. Mrs. Hanratty stood near the mercantile and whispered loudly to a neighbor, "Another hungry brood. Lord help us." Mara's breath cracked. She looked down, folding into herself as though she wished she could vanish right there. But Elias stepped to her side, not in front of her, not shielding her like she was helpless, just close enough that she wasn't standing alone against the world's cold stare. He tipped his hat. "They'll stay in the livery tonight," he said. "No trouble to anyone." Braddock glared but said nothing. Inside the dim warmth of the livery barn, Elias set out more food. Mara's hands trembled as she reached for it, then stopped, unable to take more, afraid of taking too much. So he placed it beside her again, quietly, respectfully, letting her choose the pace of her own survival. When the children finally slept in a heap of borrowed blankets, Elias leaned against a post, watching the lantern light flicker across their tired faces. He whispered to himself, voice nearly lost in the straw-scented air. "Not again. No one starves on my watch. Not any more." And for the first time in years, the hollow sky above felt a little less empty. Morning crept into the livery barn like a shy visitor, slipping between wood slats in narrow golden ribbons. Dust motes drifted through the light, dancing as if the sun were coaxing small miracles out of the stale air. Elias Crowford stirred from where he'd slept sitting up against a post, the stiffness in his back familiar as an old story. Across the barn, Mara Ellsworth was already awake. She moved slowly, as though afraid the quiet peace of the early hour might shatter if she made a sound. Her children lay curled around her, their breaths soft and even, full, for the first morning in too long. Elias noticed the way Mara watched them, her expression a mix of wonder and guilt, like she couldn't decide whether to cherish the moment or brace for it to be taken away. He stood and stoked the small stove he'd borrowed from the farrier. The barn filled with the smell of wood smoke and fresh coffee, a scent that felt like a warm hand settling on cold bones. Mara's head lifted. "You didn't have to," she murmured. "I know." Elias poured coffee into a tin cup and set it down near her, but not too close. "But I wanted to." She hesitated, fingers hovering above the cup as if touching kindness might burn. Little Junie was the first child to rouse, her eyelids fluttering like a bird testing the wind. She blinked at Elias, then at the tiny stove, then at her mother. "It smells nice," she whispered. Elias almost smiled. "Ought to. Coffee's from a batch a friend traded me." Junie tugged Mara's sleeve. "Mama, can we stay?" The hope in her small voice cracked something in the air. Mara tucked a strand of Junie's hair behind her ear, voice trembling. "We'll see, baby." But even she didn't sound convinced. Later that morning, they stepped out onto the street, the weak sunlight warming their faces. But warmth didn't soften the eyes of the townsfolk. Mrs. Hanratty stood by her washing, hands on hips. "Lord above," she muttered to her neighbor. Woman shows up with half a schoolhouse trailing behind her. Shameful. Mara stiffened like she'd been struck. The shame on her face darkened, gathering behind her eyes like a storm waiting for a reason to break. Sheriff Braddock approached, boots clacking hard on the dirt-packed street. "Crowford," he barked, "you still shepherdin' this lot?" Elias's jaw tightened. "I'm giving them ground to stand on. Nothing more." Braddock snorted. "I'm thinkin' that's already too much. We ain't got room for drifters. Widow like her'll end up on the county rolls and drain us dry." Mara's breath hitched. Elias heard it, felt it, and before he thought better of it, he stepped slightly, just slightly, closer to her. "Not a shield. Just steady. Mara ain't a skin for charity," he said quietly. "She's a skin for a chance." "And I'm sayin' she ain't earned it," Braddock snapped. The children shrank behind Mara. Lyle glared sharp enough to cut. Elias held Braddock's gaze a long moment, then said in a voice soft but immovable, "Not everyone who's hungry is Takin. Some are just survivin'." Braddock grumbled and stalked off toward his office, leaving a cloud of bitterness in his wake. By midday, the town settled back into its rhythms. Mara tried to busy herself sweeping the barn walkway, even though it wasn't expected. The broom scraped against the wood, each stroke a quiet apology she didn't need to give. Elias worked nearby, mending the sole of Lyle's worn boot. He didn't say anything, didn't force conversation. Sometimes silence is mercy. When he finished, he handed the boot back. Lyle hesitated, unsure how to accept without feeling small. "It ain't charity," Elias said softly. "Just wantin' you to walk without hurt." Lyle swallowed hard, then muttered, "Thank you," before retreating back to his mother. Mara watched the exchange with eyes full of something unsteady, gratitude, maybe, or fear of gratitude. People who have lost too much often don't know where to set their thank yous down. That evening, when the sky blushed with violet and rose, Mara finally spoke about the road behind her. She sat by the fire Elias had built outside the barn, the flames flickering like fragile promises. The children were gathered close, bellies full from the simple stew Elias had cooked. Slowly, haltingly, she began. "After Isaiah died," she paused, steadying the tremor in her throat. "After that winter drive, we tried to stay in Dawson Ridge. But the landlord said we couldn't keep the house without a man's wage. I asked for work anywhere they'd let me. Nobody wanted a woman with 5 little mouths." Elias didn't interrupt. He listened like a man who knew the cost of losing home. "We walked from town to town," Mara continued. "Always told there wasn't space. Or that folks like us would bring trouble. Every knock felt heavier than the last." She ran her fingers through the dirt at her feet, as though grounding herself. "I kept telling the children we'd find a place. But after a while, I think even they stopped believing me." Her voice cracked at the end, splitting open in a way she clearly hated. Elias didn't reach out. Didn't take her hand. Didn't dare touch the ache she carried, not until she welcomed it. But he did place his canteen beside her, the gesture soft, respectful. "The world's been unkind, Mara," he said quietly. "But that ain't on you." Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes, but didn't fall. She had learned to hold them like secrets. The night deepened, the fire glowing low and steady. The children fell asleep one by one, heads on each other's shoulders. Mara remained awake, staring into the embers as though trying to read her future in their crackling glow. Elias sat beside her, not close, not far, just at a distance where 2 lonely souls could breathe without fear. After a long stretch of silence, Mara whispered, "I don't want to be a burden." Her voice was so thin the wind nearly carried it away. Elias turned his head, studying her profile lit by the soft, dying firelight. "A burden's someone who takes more than they give," he said. "A person tryin' to stand again, that's someone worth helpin'." Their hands didn't touch, but the space between them warmed. And somewhere deep inside Mara's chest, beneath all the hunger and miles and shame, a single ember flickered. Not of hope yet, but of possibility. Morning broke sharp and golden, the kind of light that makes worn wood glow and tired hearts look a little less burdened. The town was already stirring when Elias stepped out of the livery barn, stretching the night from his shoulders. He'd slept lightly, listening as Mara's children breathed in the warmth of their first real rest. But as he looked around, he felt it, the shift in the air. A tension that coiled low, like a rattler hiding in sagebrush. Sheriff Braddock and 2 ranch hands stood out front of the mercantile, murmuring low and pointed. Their eyes kept drifting toward the barn. Elias's jaw clenched. Trouble had finally decided to show its face. Inside, Mara was smoothing Junie's hair while the others tried tying up their blankets. They'd learned long ago to expect displacement at any moment. Even comfort frightened them. "Morning," Elias said gently. "You all slept well?" Mara nodded, but the lines around her eyes deepened. She'd sensed it too, the brewing storm. Before she could speak, footsteps sounded outside, authoritative and uninvited. Braddock stepped into the doorway, hat tucked under his arm, smugness riding his shoulders like a badge. "Mara Ellsworth," he said, stretching her name into accusation. "I heard tell you been a-skin folks about stayin'. That true?" Mara startled, then straightened. "I asked if there was work." "Just work." Braddock scoffed. "Work? Widow with 5 children ain't talkin' work. She's talkin' handouts." Elias stepped forward. That's enough. Braddock's eyes slid to him, lazy and mean. Crowford, you got a habit of pickin' up strays. But this. He pointed at the children. This ain't your responsibility. A deep, steady fire lit in Elias's chest. Old, familiar, dangerous. No, he said quietly. It's my choice. Braddock narrowed his eyes. Town council says they move on by noon. We don't need beggars drainin' our stores before winter. Mara's breath hitched, just once. Soft, but it sliced Elias. He stepped between her and Braddock, not protecting her like she was fragile, but standing with her as if her dignity were something sacred. They're not leaving, Elias said. Braddock barked a laugh. And who's gonna stop that? You. Elias didn't blink. If I have to. That was when Braddock's face tightened. The ranch hands shifted, tension sharpening the air. Mara touched Elias's coat sleeve, barely. A ghost of a gesture. Please, she whispered. I don't want a fight. Her touch felt like asking a storm not to break. But Elias exhaled slowly, grounding himself. If she didn't want violence, he'd honor that. No fight, he said. But this family stays. Braddock stepped close enough for Elias to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make, Elias replied. News travels fast in small towns, faster than lightning, sharper than gossip. By midday, folks had gathered in the street, whispering, judging, ready to see humiliation served warm. Mara stood near the barn door, arms around her youngest, trying to keep her trembling hidden. The children pressed close, as if the world might steal them away. Then Mrs. Hanratty marched forward, chin high. I don't want them here. That woman'll just bring sorrow. The words hit Mara harder than any blow. Her eyes dropped to the dirt. Elias stepped in front of her, not blocking her, but facing the town so she didn't have to. I reckon sorrow ain't contagious, he said. But kindness ought to be. A ripple moved through the crowd, some approval, some scorn. Then something unexpected happened. Lyle, the oldest boy, stepped from behind his mother. His voice cracked, high and scared, but steady. We work hard. We don't take things we don't earn. Mama says we're supposed to leave places better than we find 'em. Silence swept the street. Mara gasped softly, tears springing to her eyes. Braddock shook his head. A boy's words don't change nothin'. They leave, today. No, Elias said again. But this time he stepped forward, calm but resolute. We'll build our own place. The crowd stared. Mara blinked. Our own. Elias met her eyes, really met them. There's land behind my north pasture. Water runs clean. Soil's good. You and the children can stay there. Work with me. Earn with me. He paused, voice softening. Live. The word hung between them like sunrise breaking a long night. Mara's breath shivered. Why? Why would you offer that? Elias swallowed. Because someone once helped me stand. And I learned that grace ain't meant to end with the person it saves. She covered her mouth, shaking. Braddock spat. This is foolishness, Crowford. Then let it be mine, Elias said. That afternoon, the decision became action. Elias saddled his horse. Lyle packed blankets. The littlest ones clutched the bread Mrs. Dalton, overhearing everything, quietly brought over in a guilty attempt at kindness. Mara stood at the edge of town, staring at the open plains, the possibilities stretching wide and untamed. Elias approached, stopping beside her. You don't owe me anything, he said. Her voice wavered. I know. That's what scares me. He nodded, understanding deeper than he spoke. Then let's take it slow. No promises. No declarations. Just a quiet, growing trust. Together they walked into the wild grass, children trailing like small lanterns behind them. When the new place came into view, the late afternoon sun painted everything in honeyed gold, rolling land, a clear stream, distant cottonwoods whispering in the breeze. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't even much yet. But it was theirs to become. Mara stopped, covering her heart with her hand as though steadying something fragile. It's beautiful, she whispered. "It'll be home," Elias murmured. A long silence stretched, gentle, warm, full. Then Junie tugged Mara's dress. "Mama, are we safe now?" Mara looked at Elias. He looked back, steady and sure. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Baby, we're safe." And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Mara let herself cry properly, shoulders shaking, tears unhidden. Elias didn't reach for her. But she stepped toward him, resting her forehead against his shoulder. A choice. Her choice. He exhaled, slow and grateful, and let her lean. Behind them, the children laughed. Small, tentative bursts of joy, like birds testing new wings. Hope didn't just rise. It stood tall.